Okay guys, here is our last lecture video of the year. You can see that it's short, it's only 3 slides long. We're just going to go over some patterns of evolution, and then you will have a journal entry to finish off, and then your test on this unit is going to be on Friday. So we're going to start with coevolution. So you guys should know that this prefix by now, co, means together. So coevolution means that there are two species that interact so closely with each other that they actually affect the evolution of one another. So one example is insects or pollinators and flowers. So you have a bee and a flower here. Now there is an island on the Galapagos. The Galapagos Islands are actually really interesting when you're looking at evolution because there's such a specific, there's really neat environments that aren't seen anywhere else. Like it's warm air, cold water, it's, warm water meets cold water. So you see some species that have developed that are not anywhere else in the world. So there is an island on the Galapagos where every single flower is yellow because the Galapagos bee only likes the color yellow. So after many, many, many generations, the other colored flowers just weren't getting pollinated because the Galapagos bee was only attracted to the yellow flower, and the Galapagos bee was the only pollinator on that island. So that would be an example of coevolution. Another example might be humans and domesticated dogs. We have affected the evolution of each other to the point where dogs have helped humans be more than just hunter-gatherers. They actually helped us be able to stay in one place. And interactions with humans helped wolves actually evolve into domesticated dogs. Convergent evolution. Convergent evolution means that you have two not closely related species or organisms that end up looking very similar to each other. They end up having similar structures, okay? Those structures were not due to some kind of common ancestor. So we have a shark, an ichthyosaur, which is a dinosaur, a reptile, and a dolphin. So I'm just going to focus here on the shark and the dolphin, okay? Shark is a fish, which means it never had evolved from a land animal. Its common ancestors all came from the water. But then the dolphin is a mammal, which means that at some point, a common ancestor of the dolphin actually was a land animal, because the fish and mammals are very different species. They're very different organisms. Fish get gills, they're cold-blooded or ectotherms, they breathe underwater. Whereas dolphins are mammals, they have hair, they're warm-blooded, meaning they regulate their own body temperature. They have to breathe air, which means they have to come up. But if you look at their structures, if you look at the fins here, and then the dorsal fins and the back fins, they all look very similar. Why? Because they live in similar environments. So organisms that live in similar environments often develop or evolve similar structures to each other. Very similar to analogous structures. So like the wings of a bird and a bat, or the wings of an insect and a bird and a bat. All very dissimilar structurally, internally, but they look the same and they have the same function, because those kinds of things are they're very helpful within that particular environment. So if something helps one organism in a particular environment, it's obviously going to help another organism in that particular environment, which is why things like sharks and dolphins end up having very similar structures to each other, even though they evolved completely separately from each other. The dolphin's fins evolved completely separately from a shark fin, because what use are fins on a land mammal? Nothing. They're of no use. But a dolphin is a mammal, and therefore at one point it had a common ancestor that was a land-dwelling animal. And we have divergent evolution. So I don't know if you guys have seen that movie, Divergent. Diverge means to separate, to split off, okay? It also could be called adaptive radiation. But so what we have is we have a common ancestor. So with the finches, so we've talked about Darwin's finches on the Galapagos Island, where the birds are all very, very similar to each other except for their beaks. So let's say we have this one common ancestor that fed on seeds, right? But this beak right here, you can see it's kind of wide and blunt. It's good for cracking open large seeds. But not every bird was going to be able to live off of eating large seeds, particularly if they didn't have a beak that looked like this, okay? So depending on the shape of the beak that they were born with, they might have started to eat different things. So you've got leaf eaters, you've got insects that are sharp and pointy, so they can dig into the ground. A tool-using finch, they actually have kind of a woodpecker beak, but they don't have a tongue, so they can actually use sticks to dig out grub and insects from inside trees. Buds and fruit, they have a little hook at the end, and then grubs, again, it's a little bit more pointy. So, but divergent evolution means there was a common ancestor at some point, but then because of some kind of situation with the environment, it split off into many different species. So a species, just to wrap up here, a species, similar organisms that can reproduce and have fertile offspring. So that's one of the key points that says offspring, by the way. I know I know that's messy. So one of the key points of evolution is, well, what makes one species different from another species? Well, what makes them different is, are they able to reproduce and have fertile offspring? Fertile meaning those offspring can actually have offspring of their own. So I'll give you an example. Horses and mules. Horses and donkeys, I apologize. Horses and donkeys look very, very similar to each other. They can interbreed, but when you get the resulting mule, that mule is infertile. You can't put a mule with another mule and get a new mule. The only way to get a mule is to put a horse together with a donkey. So eventually when we're talking about divergent evolution, what we're talking about are all of these birds becoming different species, meaning they've interacted with only each other for so long that they've become genetically dissimilar enough that they can no longer interbreed with other types of finches. So with that wraps up our year, really wraps up our unit on evolution, wraps up our year. You guys have a journal entry that's going to be due tonight, and then your test will be on Friday. Please remember to check in with me via Zoom at some point this week. I will be available 8:15 to 10 o'clock, and then 12 o'clock until 3:30. It's the same user ID and password for every other Zoom check-in, so it should be easy to find. And have a great summer.